For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Here we go, episode 90. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, still opportunity to join me on the river for an adventure this summer or in a future summer. Check out all of our guided and outfitted canoe trips at buffaloroamer.com. I got one going to the mighty Mississippi. If you happen to be listening to this before July 2024, you might still have an opportunity to join us. We're talking about many of the stretches we talk about on this podcast. This episode we'll be traveling to here on our Buffalo Roamer guided canoe trip. So check that out, buffaloroamer.com. Also, all different kinds of destinations other than the mighty Mississippi that we do backcountry canoe trips to. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to SodaPeakOutfitters.com. Experience true Wyoming wilderness with Soda Peak Outfitters. Greg Fischel and Fischel Paddles, makers of fine handcrafted wooden canoe paddles, and to sregear.com. Thanks to all those folks for helping you bring this podcast. All right, today's episode, John Sullivan. John is the father, I think I mentioned say this in the podcast, but there's the father of waters, which is sometimes referred to as the Mississippi. John is the father of Mississippi River paddlers, I'd like to think. He's a great guy. Really enjoyed talking with him. And without further ado, here's episode 90 with John Sullivan on Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Tell me a little bit about your connection to the Mississippi and the Mississippi River paddling and your background canoeing these rivers.
Okay, well, I've been very interested in the Mississippi River for quite a few years, mainly through my work. I worked for the Wisconsin DNR on the Mississippi River for about 30 years as a water quality biologist and studying the discharges and water quality conditions of the Mississippi River. And as part of that, I had interest in paddling. And I thought I would connect up my interest with paddling to my interest with water quality as well as photography and start doing long trips. And initially I was doing long trips on tributaries to the Mississippi. And in 2013, I paddled the Mississippi River from its source to La Crosse. And the next year I paddled from La Crosse down to the Gulf. And one of the other things I do is I collect water quality information with instrumentation during my trips. So my trips are planned to try to be done in a relatively short period of time because at the time I was doing my long trips, I was still working for the Wisconsin DNR. So I was doing this on leave time. So that's how I got started in my paddling excursions.
Amazing. And what I'm sure there's many, but what are the list of paddling trips? Maybe I guess starting with the longer distance ones that you've done.
Sure. Well, there's always a debate, an argument over which river's longer, the Missouri versus the Mississippi. People who paddle the Missouri say the Missouri's longer, and people who paddle the Mississippi say the Mississippi's longer. Technically, they're about the same length, but right now I would say the Missouri River might be a little bit longer. Historically, the Mississippi River would have been longer because of all the cutoffs.
What causes those variances?
It depends on how you draw the map through the reservoirs. The reservoirs in the Missouri River are huge. Some of them are a couple hundred miles long. And if you follow the original river course in that reservoir, that'll be longer than a straight line distance through the reservoir.
Sure.
And I'm not exactly certain how the current mileages are calculated for the Missouri River. And you could get inflated mileages by just following the original thalweg, the channel that is going through the reservoir. When you're paddling the reservoir, you're not in the channel anymore. You're in a big lake.
And
But
we're
anyway,
getting already we're already getting into the weeds here, John. But now, how about the folks who say that the Missouri River is longer and technically should be the Mississippi River below St. Louis should be called the Missouri? Is there any validity to that?
yeah, there is some truth to that. And I'll tell you this right off the bat. I worked with a prominent, renowned hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, and was actually on a research vessel with him going up the Mississippi River, starting at the Gulf of Mexico. And we were monitoring the water quality as part of a work experience. Every 10 miles, we'd take water samples from near the Gulf all the way to Minneapolis. And during that course in transit upstream, we got talking about the names of rivers, and we had this very discussion about, is the Mississippi River misnamed in its headwaters? And he thought that if it was done accurately, the Missouri River would have been called the true source of the Mississippi. And I can understand that. But on another point, he said, well, if you're looking at the major flow, the headwaters of the Ohio River would be the major source, because that is the predominant source of flow to the lower Mississippi River. So if you go by historical counts, you have, of course, Joliet and Marquette coming in from the Great Lakes and, quote, discovering the Mississippi River in its headwaters and following its course down through the Arkansas area. And that's why we got its name today. It was from the explorations of Marquette and Joliet. But from a scientific standpoint, I guess I would agree that the conventional way of identifying a source would be going the longest distance, and that would go up the Missouri River rather than up the current upper Mississippi River.
Right. And so, again, not to be splitting hairs too much, but I guess it's not splitting hairs because these are the two largest rivers in our country, so they're pretty important. So currently the system is that the longest, if you have two forks, the longest fork would be the main stem. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So depending on how, and with already describing how difficult it can be to calculate a meandering river, but B, with the reservoirs and dams and them being darn close in mileage already, including all of those things. It's a little sticky into the semantics, huh?
Well, they're very close in mileages now, but if you go back prior to the Civil War, the lower Mississippi River was probably 300 miles or more longer, because the process of improving the navigation on the lower Mississippi River, they took some of the cutoffs and they shortened them. So they went across those little thumb-like prints in the map and made it shorter, and even did it during the Civil War to isolate some of the communities along the river. And so if you go to the headwaters today in Mississippi, you'll see a sign that says the Mississippi River is, 2,500 and some miles long. Well, that was at a time when the lower Mississippi River was longer. Today it is shorter. So that sign was put there back when the state park was formed, probably about 100 years ago.
Wow. Huh. It's all interesting. Okay, so I cut you off on your canoeing and kayaking. I suppose canoeing for you journeys. So please continue on with that
Okay.
after we got into the weeds there.
Yeah, and then with my work experience with the Wisconsin DNR and studying water quality, I was interested in doing long distance trips on rivers to assess water quality conditions. And in 2013, I started paddling the Mississippi River from headwaters to La Crosse. Actually, it was 2012 in June. And then the following year, I finished the river from La Crosse to the Mississippi. But along the way, I would take water quality measurements and record those as a scientific interest. There isn't a lot of monitoring done on the entire lengths of river all at one time. And so this is kind of a unique way of expanding my knowledge on looking at how water quality changes in river systems. And I started expanding my work by starting exploring other rivers from the headwaters to the Mississippi River. And a lot of my early trips were done in the late 1990s on tributaries in Wisconsin that drained to the Mississippi. And then I expanded outward by looking at some of these other major tributaries, including the Ohio River from Pittsburgh to the Mississippi. Of course, I did the Missouri River. I did that over a 3-year period because I was limited in the amount of leave I had. Long river, so I broke it up into 3 segments, and that worked out well. And I've paddled the other named rivers, state-named rivers that flow to the Mississippi. So besides the Ohio and the Missouri, I did the Illinois, the Wisconsin, the Minnesota, and the Iowa.
It's amazing. It's a lot of rivers.
And then a lot of other rivers kind of that are smaller, but still drain to the Mississippi.
And there's so much to dive into there, just among all of those rivers. But what's your general takeaway from the water quality side of things over your career from these different rivers?
Well, when I did my paddling, I would note, my observations as well as recording the water quality that I had, the ability to monitor with the instrumentation I had with me. I was using pretty simple equipment and mainly recording things like dissolved oxygen, water temperature, transparency, and a constituent called conductivity, which is a measure of mineral content of water. And all of them gives you some indication of what's happening in a river. And since I'm only doing the river once, I can't give you much of a historical perspective other than what I know from history. But where I would run into problems would generally be where you have major discharges, major municipalities. And the problems I would see were not insurmountable in a sense of contributing to a serious water quality problem, just that I would note a change in the water quality based on perhaps some municipal effluents that were entering into the water or industrial waste. One thing that I was looking for when I did the Mississippi River was a change in quality in that system. And I was somewhat surprised that I didn't see more of an impact from some of the industrial discharges, but the type of monitoring I was doing wouldn't generally pick up those discharges. I did make observations of some pretty significant, sizable discharges in the Louisiana area. But I didn't, for example, notice any discoloration of the water. I didn't notice any fish kills associated with any discharges. One thing I did see that was somewhat surprising is that as I was getting closer to New Orleans, I was seeing an improvement in water clarity, and I was struggling to figure out why the water clarity was getting better as I was heading through that corridor. And then I got to thinking, that's the corridor where you have the ocean-going vessels, but the water depth in that reach of the river is substantial. It can range from 100 to 200 feet. And I don't think there was a lot of sediment resuspension due to the ocean-going vessels that are in that reach. And so the sediment is a little more stable during the time I was paddling. It was during low flow.
And why do you think ocean-going vessels affect the sediment load?
Well, their prop wash could influence the resuspension if they were traveling at a high rate of speed, but there's no way those vessels are going to travel at a high rate of speed because they don't have the maneuvering capability in a narrow channel. So they have to go at a relatively slow speed, and I don't think their propulsion was disturbing the sediment. And so the river was so much deeper, the sediment that was coming downstream from upstream was settling in that reach of river. And so the water clarity was starting to improve as I got closer and closer to the Gulf. But on the other hand, which is kind of interesting, I was going to expect this, is that the salinity, the mineral content of the water was increasing as I was getting closer to the Gulf. And you probably heard about this past spring. There's a term that's called saltwater intrusion. And this is where the Mississippi River is flowing into the Gulf, and it flows into the Gulf kind of near the surface. But the Gulf, because it has high salt content, is actually moving upstream in the Mississippi River underneath the fresh water. And that will move as far as New Orleans. Wow. And they try to disrupt that upstream migration of salt water by putting in a low-head dike all the way across the Mississippi River. And that helps for a while, but as soon as the river gets to real low flow conditions, it doesn't work as well.
Wow.
The salt water can migrate over that dike. But anyway, when the ships are moving downstream, they're creating some turbulence, and they can mix that water, the salt water that's underneath the fresh water, with the fresh water that's on the top. And that's why the conductivity would tend to increase as you are approaching the Gulf of Mexico.
And where was all of this data going?
I shared it with people that I knew that were interested in water quality of the Mississippi River, some of the state biologists that I worked with. When I was working for the Wisconsin DNR, I knew who those people were. I shared it with some individuals from the U.S. Geological Survey. It's not widespread. I didn't publish anything per se, but I've got quite a bit of information with it, and maybe I should put this in a more formal document to document it so that it's available for posterity's sake. I did come across some interesting observations when I was paddling some small tributaries. I was paddling the Rock River, which flows from the headwaters of the Horicon Marsh area in southern Wisconsin through Illinois in your neck of the woods and flows into the Rock Island area in the Mississippi. It's trying to remember, probably around 300 miles long. But I paddled that in 1998 during a flood condition. And that flood condition resulted in the surface water inundating the floodplain and the floodplain marshes in the headwaters of the Rock River. And the vegetation that was riparian to the Rock River was inundated by all this water. And that vegetation can create what's called an oxygen demand. The respiration of the plants, the emergent vegetation that might be present along a small river system like the Rock River, can contribute to oxygen depletion, and as well as the soils that get flooded in along a shallow habitat along a riparian area like the Rock River. And the combination of the soil oxygen demand and the vegetation oxygen demand created very low dissolved oxygen levels, such that I had a large fish kill that I documented. It was quite extensive, and the Rock River actually was devoid of oxygen for, probably about a 30 or 40 mile reach of river. And
Holy cow.
This has very rarely been documented because people don't experience it by traveling through a river on a long distance trip. They might be aware that oxygen is depleted at one point, but they don't know how extensive it is because they're not traveling the river. So I was able to actually document how extensive this was. And it wasn't due to pollution discharge. It was due to kind of a natural flooding event.
Hey, it's Will here. Want to take a moment to let you know about today's sponsor, SREgear.com. SRE Gear is a family-owned and operated outdoor gear shop in Black River Falls, Wisconsin, and they have everything you need for your next adventure, whether you're camping, backpacking, hiking, paddling, or just getting out there and exploring. SREgear.com has the gear you need to get you to those places you love. I recently picked up a new Garmin InReach from SRE. I needed a new communication device for the guided canoe trips I've been leading, and after talking through a few options with the owner, Nick, there, he helped me sort out what I needed and get squared away. And that's one of the things that sets SREgear.com apart is the unbeatable customer service. Call or email with any questions, and you'll talk with the owner, Nick, or someone there close to him. So before you go and buy any outdoor equipment from a big box store, be sure to check out family-owned and operated SREgear.com, and be sure to use the discount code WILL at checkout for 10% off your first purchase. That's discount code WILL at checkout for 10% off. SREgear.com. Great gear, great prices, unbeatable customer service. All of this in part also leads, I want to dive more into the trips here at some point, but all of this also in part leads to the other aspect we haven't touched about yet. I can tell just by talking to you that you're very astute's not the right word, but you like categorizing things and record keeping, I should say. And your I don't know if you created it, but the admin of the Mississippi River Paddlers Facebook page, which has now come to be, at least in my estimation, kind of the source and the hub of Mississippi River thru paddlers or long distance paddlers on the Mississippi. It's kind of come to be the community hub, online community hub of those strange folks of us committed to that, or not committed, but who enjoy that. So how did that come to be? And how's it going?
Yeah, well, we have 4,500 members from my last evaluation of the group, and started in 2014 with 5 of us. And it's just kind of interesting how this all transpired. I had a long-term interest, of course, in trying to figure out how I can improve my knowledge of a river. I had to do a lot of studying before I went and paddled a river. And I thought, well, how could I make it easier for people to paddle a river? And I heard about this social website called Facebook, and I wasn't too excited about it. And my kids kept telling me that I should get on so they could send me messages. I said, well, you can call me. Anyway, I got to thinking, and then also talking to a good friend from Montana, Norm, who runs the Missouri River Paddlers Group,
Yeah, Norm Miller.
and Norm Miller. And he got me interested in saying, well, I started this group on the Missouri River, and it's working out well as a way of communicating with people who are interested in through paddling, and that maybe that's something you ought to consider for the Mississippi. And after I finished my paddling trip in the Mississippi River in 2013, that following winter, I was on Facebook for really about the first time trying to figure out how to use it. And I thought, well, I'm going to create a group called Mississippi River Paddlers. And that evening, when I tried to create the group, it said group already established. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And so I contacted the administrator. Um, I can't remember his name. He's from California, I believe. And I asked him, I said, well, are you going to manage this Mississippi River Paddlers group? Because I think it'd be useful. I'd be willing to help you. And he said, well, since I was living in La Crosse and more closely associated with the people who are paddling the river, why don't you take over and be the administrator? So he kind of handed it off to me. And actually, he was trying to set up this group almost at the exact same time that I was doing it. So we coincidentally were having the same thought in getting this group established. And those original people are still Facebook administrators in our group. So
and it's just really blossomed and exploded. Like I said, the Mississippi and the Missouri River Paddlers page, which you mentioned, both of those two pages are, I call it like the community hub for long distance paddlers.
Well, both Norm Miller and I are pretty stringent about making the focus on paddling and how can we help the paddling community that are trying to paddle the length of the Mississippi. And so we both have decided to make it a closed group, and the reason being we can control who enters the group, and they have to give us some reason why they want to join. And this has really helped us prevent some of the spam attacks that you get and the unsolicited stuff that you see on Facebook. And so we don't have much of a problem with that. Plus, the people who are in our groups are very interested in helping paddlers. In fact, that's one of the conditions of joining the group. Not only do you want to learn about how to paddle the Mississippi River from source to sea, but then once you finish your trip, you're going to help provide your information to other people who are interested in doing the same thing. So I think that's why it's got some traction.
Yeah, it's great. And along with that aspect of it, you being the I guess, correct me if I'm wrong here, but being the detail-oriented person you are, much more than me. That's one of my faults, unfortunately. You have kind of taken not only the Facebook admin part of it, but also a record-keeping aspect of sorts of Mississippi River through paddlers, right?
Yeah, exactly. Before I mention the list, one of the other things I did that I knew would be very helpful to paddlers that are doing the Mississippi River is provide a portaging map for all the dams that we have on the Mississippi River headwaters. There are some 15 dams in Minnesota that you've got a portage or no locks to go through. So you have to get around those dams. And I knew from my previous experience that having some knowledge about what side of the river you portage on, how long the portage length was, providing some kind of a map for a portage would be very beneficial to anyone who is interested in paddling the river. So that's one thing that I did. And I've made some improvements on that based on changes in those portaging routes over time. But the other thing I thought I would do would be to document how many people are actually paddling the river each year, and also as a safety measure. So if someone was going to be paddling the Mississippi River and they wanted to have other people kind of keep track of them to make certain they were safe, I thought, well, why don't I just put a list together on when somebody starts and when they finish. And then I also encourage them that as they're paddling the Mississippi River to provide a post occasionally to describe where they're at and how things are going. And that helps other paddlers even in the same year, because they can check ahead and see this individual, well, he's 2 or 3 weeks ahead of me, and these are the conditions he's seeing on the river. So that's something I need to be aware of when I'm in that reach of river. Or if somebody's going to be starting a trip, in a month from now, what are the current conditions in the headwaters and being prepared for it, such as low flow conditions.
It's great.
Anyway, I've been doing the list since 2014 or 2015, amazing. I think.
It's John. It's almost the Himalayan mountain climbers, right? They have their own record keeping, and their whole own world of publishing things. Who gets first ascents, and I forget what the entity is in the Himalayas that sets the official record books, but it seems like you are our father record keeper of the father of rivers. So thanks for doing that.
Well, I'm one source.
Yes. But what can you tell me about general themes of just kind of like the basics that people are interested in, or at least that I'm interested in, about people doing the river since 2014 or 2015, since you've been keeping record? What are the numbers of people doing it? How often is it? And how long is an average trip? I guess are two big ones.
Yeah, well, every year is different, and I don't have all the information in front of me, but some years we might get as many as 20 to 30 people starting at the headwaters, and with an interest of going to at least New Orleans or to the Gulf. Of those that start, I would say maybe only half of them make the entire trip that first year. And those that don't finish the river, many of them come back and continue their trip the following year. Everyone paddles the river at their own rate and their own type of boat. And it's a learning experience. Most people they don't have any prior experience in doing long distance paddling. So the first attempt at doing a long river seems to be the Mississippi. And to me, that's not what I would recommend. I would say if you're interested in paddling the Mississippi, get your feet wet, so to speak, your paddles wet by paddling some other rivers, shorter rivers, so you can learn the ropes, so to speak, and how to camp, what sort of things are important to take along, what things are not important, and then learn about the Mississippi River first and then start it. We have people that have never paddled before or did very little paddling and started at the headwaters, and they learned as they went south. I wouldn't recommend that as a way to learn how to paddle the Mississippi, but there are people who have done it that way.
That
That's not,
surprises me that you say 20 to 30 people. Obviously we're kind of shooting from the hip here without the numbers in front of you, but I would have guessed, and that's the temps or people at the start, I would have guessed it was more than that.
no, that's generally the number. There may have been a few years it was more than that, but I think this year so far we might only have about 15 people.
Interesting.
And every year is different. I don't have a good handle on it because I don't have my. I did put a graph together as you're indicating the details. That's something I probably should summarize here sometime.
And we should mention as well that if people are interested in looking at this stuff, a lot of information is in the files and on that Mississippi River Facebook paddlers page, right?
That's correct. And you have to join the group, I think, to be able to view the files. But in that files section, that's where we try to record pertinent information. For example, the portaging maps for the Mississippi River, information about, well, what people think are most important to take along, items, supplies, and things like this. There's information on books, that paddling books that people have published. I usually have a list of what's available. So if somebody wanted to read a detailed accounting of someone's trip on the river, they could get that on someone's published book. There may be some websites that are posted that describe that as well.
And for your personal trips, there's not, I've talked at this point, John, I've talked to a lot of people. I want to say, I don't want to step over my bounds here, but I have to guess that I've talked to more people who've paddled the canoe or canoed the Mississippi River than just about anybody for podcasts on this episode, for episodes on this podcast. I've talked to a lot of them. I've talked to a lot of people who've done the Missouri. I've talked to people who've done the Missouri and the Mississippi. I don't think I've talked to anyone who's done the Missouri, the three mightiest rivers. Mightiest maybe is overstated, but the three largest rivers of the continental U.S., the Missouri, the Mississippi, and the Ohio. How do those three rivers differ and vary between them? Like what are kind of the characteristics in paddling those three rivers? How similar and different are they?
Okay, well, they certainly are different. The Ohio River is, the industrial heartland of a lot of activities, particularly the coal industry. There's some very large lock and dams. All the lock and dams on the Ohio River are double locks. So on the Mississippi River, we only have two, I think it's two, can't remember now, two dams that have two locks in them. On the Ohio River, they have a 600-foot lock and a 1,200-foot lock. And eventually, I'm not sure if it's finalized yet, but at Olmsted, the last lock and dam on the Ohio River, they have two 1,200-foot locks.
Holy cow.
So on the Ohio River, you see a lot more commercial towboats heading upstream and downstream. There is very little backwater on the Ohio River. It's kind of like a trough. And when the Ohio River floods, it goes up very fast and it goes up very high. It doesn't spread out. It just has to go up. And so like at Louisville, I think the water level fluctuation is probably in the order of 50 feet. Now, here in La Crosse, we have a water level fluctuation of maybe 10 feet as a comparison. So anyway, there's a lot of flow in the Ohio River, and the commercial traffic is much heavier. So that's one major difference about the Ohio River. There are a lot of communities along the Ohio River where you can stop and resupply if necessary. So that was always, a nice opportunity, especially if you needed water. Not a lot of campgrounds on the Ohio River. The other thing about the Ohio River,
not to interject you too much, John, but I don't know if you're like picking up a coffee mug or something, but I'm hearing something setting down on the table, or maybe it's just the iPad.
yeah, I think it was me. Let me try this.
Okay. Very good.
All right. I was leaning on it, and I think my table was shaking.
Okay.
But
no
anyway,
problem.
on the Ohio River, the flow was much higher, and it presented, because there was not much area between the river and the railroad track, it presented more problems of finding a quiet place to camp. So there are many sections of the Ohio River where you're going to be camping on dry ground, of course, but within probably 50 feet of a major railroad track, and they're busy. They're usually running on both sides of the river. So
And
sometimes it was pretty.
How many days
I
was your
did
Ohio?
it. The Ohio River was 950 miles long, and I did it in 3 weeks. I did it pretty quickly. I was averaging about 50 miles a day. The reason being, I had to finish. I only had a certain amount of leave time. So fortunately, I had good flow conditions, so I could get a long way downstream each day. So that was one of my faster descents. Now, the Mississippi River is also a commercial corridor up to Minneapolis, but the commercial activity really doesn't pick up very much until you get to St. Louis. And then from St. Louis downstream, it's pretty busy. The port of St. Louis in particular is very busy. And of course, the port of New Orleans is very busy from Baton Rouge downstream. And not only you got to deal with the typical commercial towboats, but you got to deal with the ocean-going vessels below Baton Rouge. The headwaters of the Mississippi River are very marsh-like and very enchanting, if you ask me. I've enjoyed the headwaters of the Mississippi River. It's kind of slow going and somewhat tedious because of the meanderings, but you see a lot of wildlife, a lot of waterfowl in the headwaters of the Mississippi River. And you don't see that on the Ohio River at all. The Ohio River starts because it combines the Allegheny and Monongahela at Pittsburgh. So this is where it starts. Now, there again, technically, the Ohio River should have gone up either the Allegheny or the Monongahela. I don't know why they didn't define it differently, but they didn't. Now, the Missouri River is definitely unique. The headwaters of the Missouri River, of course, are in the Rocky Mountains. And I was blown away by the beauty of the upper Missouri River, especially in the Rocky Mountain area. I had not done much traveling in the Rocky Mountains, so my first real experience of the West was paddling the headwaters of the Missouri River. And then I was surprised on how dry the conditions were. The air humidity was very low in moisture as you travel through the headwaters of Missouri. And I noticed my hands were cracking and actually bleeding because it was so dry. And of course, the landscape was very dry. I was paddling it in the fall, September period. Also, the other thing about the Missouri River, you have to deal with forest fires. And I didn't know whether or not my trip was even going to be pulled off. I started in 2007, and the Forest Service closed down the headwaters of the Missouri River because of forest fire hazards. But they opened it up about a week before I was going to start my trip. And so we headed out there not knowing whether or not they would close it again. But once I got on the river, I guess I didn't worry about it. Other than the fact that there was a lot of smoke in the air, and there were some sites that I definitely could not see very far because of the haze due to the smoke, and I could smell it. And there were some campsites, forested areas where you could actually see the forest fires burned all the way down to the Missouri River. I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah,
And some of
that
the camps.
headwaters area is just beautiful, isn't it? I lived in Bozeman for a few years, Bozeman, Montana,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
my buddies and I would go out and paddle the headwaters of the Missouri, and then the Jefferson and the Madison and the Gallatin, which formed to
Right.
create the Missouri. And so, yeah, I would do that first stretch very often, and not much past it. But then also I did a few stretches on the Missouri. I lived in South Dakota as well for a few years.
Oh, okay.
So I did a few stretches in like the White Cliff section below, what is it, Fort Randall Dam.
Yeah. Gavin's Point.
Yes, exactly. Also really beautiful. But yeah, man, there's something about those mountain rivers that are just so stunning, isn't it?
Yeah, anytime you have a high elevation next to a body of water, it's very attractive. I mean, that's why portions of the upper Mississippi River are so attractive, because we have these tall bluffs that are, riparian to the Mississippi River. And then we have these huge backwater areas that are somewhat unique. But the other thing that's real different about the Missouri River are the huge reservoirs. And some of these reservoirs, as I mentioned earlier, are 200 miles long. And it takes a week or more to paddle through them. People who paddle the Mississippi River think Lake Pepin is big. Well, Lake Pepin is a large natural lake for the Mississippi River, but it's small compared to these reservoirs that are on the Missouri River. And so the difficulty getting through the large reservoirs are, of course, wind and what kind of conditions are you going to be experiencing. And it was the only trip where I was actually windbound for several days on any of my trips. I never had windbound on the Mississippi or any other tributaries, but I certainly had days where I could not paddle the Missouri River because it was just, I paddle a canoe that's covered with a cover.
Yeah.
That's
What are you paddling on these trips?
They're solo canoes. It's usually a Winona Prism, 16 and a half feet long. And if I want to get a little more capacity, I paddle a Winona Solo Plus, which is also 16 and a half feet long, but it's a little bit wider. And the Solo Plus means it could be paddled tandem or solo. And I just take out the front and rear seat and use it for my gear. And
Right.
I like the Solo Plus because it's a little more stable, but I do a lot of poling, especially in the headwaters. Instead of paddling, I push with a pole, and standing in the Solo Plus is a little more forgiving than trying to pull
Yes.
my narrow Winona Prism.
Yes.
But I pull both canoes, and
Great.
I enjoy doing that.
I remember, and I don't know if you do as well, but so along with all the Facebook stuff, you've also welcomed lots of people in and helped out paddlers as well, whether it's giving a sandwich or just helping them in whatever way, whether, like we said already, with directions and maps and all that stuff. But you're a river angel. And so in 2017, when I was paddling through La Crosse, I stopped and we connected on an island there. What's the name of that island?
Let me think. Yeah.
There's a park there.
Oh, that would have been Pettibone Park.
Yeah, I think that sounds
And
right.
the
Maybe
name
it's
of the
not,
island.
but
It is an island. I'm just trying to think
Okay.
of the official name of it. I don't think it's called Pettibone Island. Anyway.
Regardless, an island on the Mississippi outside of La Crosse, and we connected and ended up coming back and you put me up at your place. And I remember pulling up, and I had just gotten in La Crosse or in Winona So I had stopped randomly in Winona. I'd met a guy at Itasca when I was starting on day number 1, and he was there with his son, and they were doing a camping trip at Itasca State Park, and he was like, "Hey, what's going on? Just seems like, you got a lot of gear. What's up?" And I told him I was planning to paddle the whole river to the Gulf. And he was like, "Yeah, well, we live in Winona. If you make it there, give me a shout." And at that point, I didn't even know where Winona was or how far or even that it was a place on the Mississippi. But sure enough, however many days later, 20, 25 days, something like that, I made it to Winona and gave him a ring. And he put me up, and it just so happened to be the Winona Canoe, which, of course, as you were well aware, are manufactured and made there in Winona, Minnesota, happened to be their factory defect sale that weekend. And so I was paddling in Old Town Penobscot at the time, and that's what I'd paddled up to there. And when I went, I did it. The guy I was staying with knew Mike Chickanowski, the owner of Winona Canoe. And so he put me in contact with him. Mike gave me a whole tour of the facility and like a whole 2-hour tour and showed me how all the boats are made. And then gave me a Winona Prism on the cheap for their factory defect sale. And so I paddled a Prism down the rest of the river and then left the Old Town with my new friend in Winona, Minnesota. So funny. And I remember paddling up to you and you were like, "Oh boy, that's a fast boat." And I was feeling great about my new boat.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people that paddle the Prism long distances. It's a nice boat, very efficient, and you can cover some pretty good mileage with that in a short period of time.
Great boat.
I enjoy mine. In fact, I actually picked up a used Kevlar version of the Prism last year, and I'm going to give my original Prism to my son.
Oh, wow.
So
very good. That's a great gift.
He's going to inherit the boat. It's going to carry with it the name Irish Voyageur on it. So hopefully he'll hold on to it and give it to somebody else.
That's awesome.
That
mine
boat,
is Kevlar as well.
Was yours the Kevlar layup?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a nice boat. And my original one was the Tough Weave, which is a fiberglass boat, and it's quite a bit heavier. It's about 55 pounds, I think. And as my age increases, I enjoy the lightness of the canoe.
Yes,
Kevlar canoe.
It's like a feather, man. It's crazy. Explore the beautiful and rugged Wyoming backcountry with Soda Peak Outfitters in Moran, Wyoming, just down the road from world-famous Jackson Hole. SodaPeakOutfitters.com is the team to talk to get off the beaten path and into an unforgettable wilderness experience. Nestled in the heart of the greater Yellowstone area, Soda Peak calls Bridger Teton National Forest and the Teton Wilderness home. They specialize in guided and DIY fishing and pack trips into some of the most pristine and remote wilderness and water that the lower 48 has to offer. Pack trips by horse, mule, or llama make getting deep into the rugged backcountry doable and makes it a Western adventure in itself. I know one of the trips that I'd love to do is their thoroughfare fishing trip, where with a horse pack team, they take you into the headwaters of the famed Yellowstone River to fish and explore over 5 days. Untouched water, rising trout on a summer morning. Yeah, that sounds right up my alley. They also offer a single-day guided fishing trips as well as trail rides and more. Their pack trips are a great way to disconnect with civilization and reconnect with nature and the mountains. Charles is one of the owners there and the guy to talk to. He can help you tailor a custom trip or get you signed up for any of their classic adventures. Check them out at SodaPeakOutfitters.com. That's soda like the drink, peakoutfitters.com. Or give Charles an email at charles@SodaPeakOutfitters.com and use code BR2024 at checkout for 5% off any trip you take with Soda Peak. That's BR as in Buffalo Roamer 2024. Experience true Wyoming wilderness with Soda Peak Outfitters. Hey, it's Will here. I want to take a moment to let you know about our show sponsor and partner, Fischel Paddles, makers of fine, handcrafted wooden canoe paddles. I spent a lot of time paddling rivers and lakes, and Fischel paddles are the best canoe paddles that I've come across. I use the Ray Special model myself, and I outfit all the guided trips that I run with Fischel paddles too, because I think they're the best. Each paddle is handmade by Greg Fischel at his shop in Flagstaff, Arizona, from a single piece of wood. What I love most is the shape and feel of the paddle. Other than being beautiful and efficient, it puts less strain on your shoulders and arms than a typical paddle would, while actually giving you more control and finesse with each stroke. Plus, the shape of the blade just feels right cutting through the water. All paddles are customizable from the type of wood, whether that's cherry, ash, or maple, to laser engravings, and my favorite, which is the leather strap that Greg pins around the shaft so that it doesn't get beat up as you run along the gunnels, prying off or doing the J-stroke in the back of the stern there. So go get yourself a Fischel paddle now and feel the difference. Use the code WILL at checkout. That's WILL to get a free wooden paddle hanger with any paddle purchase. That way you can show off and organize that new handmade paddle. Check them out at FischelPaddles.com. That's FISHELL paddles.com. Fischel Paddles, handcrafted wooden canoe paddles. What about the other rivers, the tributaries, the Wisconsin, the Illinois, the Minnesota, the Iowa? What of those stick out to you? And is there one of those that is leaps and bounds above the others?
Well, if someone asked me which river would you want to return to and paddle again, it would probably be the St. Croix River that flows into the Mississippi River at Prescott.
Yeah, beautiful.
In 2000, year 2000, I believe, I paddled from Lake Superior to La Crosse by going up the Bois Brule River, about 35 miles, and then taking a portage to the St. Croix, and then following that down the St. Croix, meeting up with the Mississippi, and then paddling back to La Crosse. And the reason I did that is I wanted to follow one of the early pathways to the Mississippi River, because when the voyageurs would come in from the Great Lakes, they would find various ways of getting to the Mississippi River. And one of the routes was up this 35-mile long stretch of river that flowed into Lake Superior. And I went up it and crossed the divide, about 2.5 mile portage, to get into the headwaters of the St. Croix. And that was very unique. I almost felt like a true voyageur, because I wasn't exactly certain where the portage was, and didn't have much of a map to try to find it. But I did locate it, and I was pretty excited at the fact that I actually found the portage route. Otherwise, it would have been pretty difficult getting out of that area. Anyway, the headwaters of the St. Croix are just a beautiful body of water, and I make it comparable to, the headwaters of the Missouri River for aesthetic purposes. There's very few impacts to the St. Croix. It's a wild and scenic river.
Yeah,
so
it's beautiful.
Pretty unique.
I did the St. Croix in a paddleboard, actually, which is my first ever time paddleboard camping and paddleboard paddling. And I was fishing on a fishing trip, if you can believe it. We did 3 nights north of, just upriver, a ways upriver. I forget the put in, but a ways upriver of where the Namakagon joins.
Yes.
And yeah, absolutely beautiful.
And I did paddle the Namakagon River too, from Hayward down to the St. Croix. And that's also a wild and scenic river, and very unique, beautiful, very small stream. A lot of rapids, but the rapids aren't serious. Nothing that earth-shaking that you have to worry about portaging. But then the Wisconsin River is a very interesting river, mainly because it has so many dams on it. and of all the rivers that I've paddled, that's probably the one that has the highest density of dams. on it. And maybe that's why the Wisconsin Valley Improvement Company, the people who regulate the flows on the headwaters of the Wisconsin River, they gave it its name, the hardest working river in the nation. And when I first started my working career for the Wisconsin DNR, I was stationed in Rhineland, Wisconsin, and that's in the headwaters of the Wisconsin. So I was pretty familiar with the Wisconsin River. And there are a lot of pulp and paper mills on the Wisconsin River. And that was another reason for my interest in paddling the Wisconsin, is seeing the impact of the pulp and paper mill discharges on the Wisconsin River throughout its length. And the other thing that was fortunate for me on the Wisconsin River, I came across a document that was showing all the portage routes for the Wisconsin River. And that was very helpful. And it gave me another reason for helping paddlers on the Mississippi River, because I found it very valuable to describe, the portaging routes, because I benefited by seeing that on the Wisconsin River.
What's your take on the lower? It's the only section, or not the only section, actually. I've done many sections of the Wisconsin River, but one of my favorites. What's your take on the lower section of it? And, they say the lower, 92 miles, the free-flowing section. But specifically, I'm curious what your perspective is and take is from like south downriver Boscobel to the confluence of the Mississippi. You like that section?
Well, the lower Wisconsin River is another high quality stream that doesn't have a lot of water quality problems at all, and not major. You don't have any major discharges. The riparian land is protected. There's not a lot of allowance for development, so it's a very scenic waterway. And again, it's a waterway that passes through a country that has very high bluffs along both banks. So it's a very attractive stream to paddle. And I would make it somewhat comparable to the Black River in Wisconsin and the Chippewa River, although the Wisconsin River, the bluffs are higher. But the Black River and the lower Wisconsin or lower Chippewa River are also very attractive areas for paddling because there's not a lot of development along the river corridor.
So I do. I offer guided canoe trips, and we do one section on the lower Wisconsin, and then another section. A new one I'm doing this year is right in your neck of the woods. We're going to go on the Trempealeau River, and then start on the Trempealeau River, and then take out at Goose Island there, near La Crosse.
Where are you going to start on the Trempealeau?
We're going to put in a few miles upriver. I forget the name of the exact spot.
Okay.
But we can chat about that. But my point about this is that, every time I bring up, the lower Wisconsin or even the Mississippi to a lesser extent, but specifically the lower Wisconsin to other paddlers or to people from Wisconsin, they all poo-poo it. They think it's like, just a beer float or it's not pretty or whatever. And then you get out there and it's like that section in particular near the confluence, it's just stunningly beautiful, all to yourself, as wild as could be. And it blows my mind that people poo-poo it.
Well, it's interesting that you say poo-pooing it. The Wisconsin River is very heavily used during the summer. And in some cases, it gets too much use. One of my first trips, I paddled the lower Wisconsin River at least 3 times, maybe 4 times. But one of the times I was paddling it, I came across a group of 73 canoes. And they were probably high school age students. And I found the leaders of the trip. And I asked them, I said, where do you plan on camping? The reason I asked that is I wanted to make certain I was far enough away that I didn't hear them at night.
Yeah.
But the problem with the Wisconsin River is that it gets heavily used. the islands, of course, they're nice to camp on. They're nice sand beaches, but where do people go? How do they handle their waste? Where do they do their number two? And I found it very objectionable to see a lot of toilet paper coming out of the sand in the areas near the river, indicating that that's where somebody went. And
Yes.
I think that they need to regulate that by requiring them to use the sanitary bags that you are required to take with you and use and haul out,
I
similar to
agree.
your requirements on the Missouri River, because it is a problem. And
I agree.
I
To
wasn't
be fair,
recording fecal.
to be fair, I think that is more in the sections of the rental sections, where they have rental fleets that go. In the section, particularly south of Boscobel to the confluence, at least from my
Yeah.
experience, it is, I think everybody takes out at Boscobel. And so the section downriver
Yeah.
from there, at least in my experience, is very rural. And, if you see another group out there, it's surprising.
No, I agree with you because there aren't a lot of places to take out after that. You got to go all the way down to the Mississippi generally. But you're right. Where the greatest recreational use is where the commercial facilities are supporting day trips or maybe a couple day trip down the river. But I think that's something that the state of Wisconsin is going to have to bite the bullet on and require that. That's because it's just
Yes,
objectionable to see that.
I agree.
Oh,
But with that being said, how do you find people's like people outside of the paddling communities, just people in lacrosse, like, what do they think of the Mississippi? Because my perception is that people, maybe lacrosse is different because it's in your backyard and it's so beautiful there, but people have a hard time believing that the Mississippi River is a destination for wilderness and beauty, especially in that section where you are.
well, I think most people that have paddled or traveled along the Mississippi River has passed through Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota recognize how beautiful it is because of the bluffs and the backwaters. So I don't think you have to argue very much that it isn't an attractive area to paddle. What I think you would hear from some people saying, well, I'm never going to paddle the lower Mississippi River because it's just, a corridor for towboats to go up and downstream, and it's not very attractive. And to tell you the truth, I kind of had that thought myself when I was coming upriver with the USGS vessel doing research on the Mississippi River. I did it in the spring of the year on this research vessel, so I was seeing the river at flood stage, and I got looking at the river. And I thought, how does anyone find a place to camp on this river when it's flowing at flood condition? And there's no sandbars, and it's traveling at a high rate of speed. And I thought, boy, this is going to be a very difficult river to paddle. But I was surprised how beautiful the lower Mississippi River was because it's such an expansive river. You felt like you were on a large flowing lake, and you had beautiful sunrises and beautiful sunsets. Now, I did it in the fall of the year when the Mississippi River flows were low, so I didn't have any problem with finding a place to camp because a lot of the sandbars were exposed. And some of these sandbars were enormous, a couple miles long and maybe a half mile wide. Now, in the spring of the year, that'd be a different story. But in the lower Mississippi River, you hear the people say, well, I wouldn't go out on the Mississippi River at all. It's not safe. And so you'd hear that from the people you might encounter along the way. And to some extent, there's some truth to the fact that the river can be very dangerous. And that's why people have to be aware of the conditions and be aware that it's very fast flowing and you have to deal with some very strong currents and then deal with the commercial boats that travel up and down the river. Yeah, I guess I can understand why people would say it's not a wilderness river, but certainly there are stretches of the Mississippi, even on the lower Mississippi, that you might construe as wilderness, because you might go for days and not see many people other than the commercial traffic heading upstream and downstream.
Right. And how about the Mississippi River backwaters? That's something that people often, can't really grasp or concept. But I know you like to play around in the backwaters there near La Crosse. Tell me a little bit about the backwater habitat, and I guess you like checking it out and paddling the different channels,
Yeah.
right?
The backwaters of the upper Mississippi River have some of the most diverse aquatic life of any river system that I've been on. Waterfowl, the diversity of the fish community, the vertebrate community, the types of habitat you see. When you're traveling many rivers, you don't have an opportunity to see anything other than maybe the tree-lined area. But on the upper Mississippi River, because it's 2 miles wide, the floodplain is 2 miles wide, the Mississippi River is more than just the main channel. The main channel is only, several hundred feet wide, but the floodplain of the Mississippi River is about 2 miles wide. So there are plenty of off-channel areas, side channels, tertiary channels that you can explore, that you can get away from the main channel and not see anybody and see the wildlife that are using those backwater areas. I grew up at Horicon, which is at the mouth or the bottom of the Horicon Marsh, the largest cattail marsh in the world, supposedly. And so I was familiar with wetlands and large floodplain areas, having lived in that area. Well, the Mississippi River backwaters is like one large wetland. In fact, it is a wetland of international significance. It's very unique. And that's one of the reasons why the migration corridor follows the Mississippi River, is that we have all these floodplain wetlands that provide a resting stop for the migrating waterfowl, both during the spring and fall. And so it does provide a very unique area for the wildlife, but also a very beautiful area to explore by canoe or traveling along both sides of the river by car or bicycle.
Yeah. Yeah. I love going around, checking them out, exploring. It's like a weaving through a map, seeing where the dead ends are, seeing if it goes through. Great fishing. Yeah. Just another awesome aspect of the mighty Mississippi, huh?
Yeah, you don't see that on the Ohio River for sure, and you see very little of that on the Missouri River. You don't have that opportunity, and you see a little bit of side channels on the lower Mississippi, but because it has been entrained by levees, a lot of the off-channel areas are now isolated based on the Corps of Engineers channelizing the lower Mississippi.
So you've done all these trips: the Wisconsin River, the Illinois River, the Minnesota River, the Iowa River, the Ohio, the Missouri, the Mississippi, and one of the common themes through those was getting leave time and making it work with the work schedule. But I was talking to you earlier, and you said now you're retired.
I am retired.
I figure you should be out on the water then, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm still paddling, but in the last several years, I've mainly been sticking close to home. And I've taken up a lot of interest in a local wetland called the La Crosse Marsh, and I'm monitoring that. As I said, I grew up on the Horicon Marsh in eastern Wisconsin, and this is kind of like returning home for me. I can spend my fun time exploring this little marsh in La Crosse, and then when I get bored with that, I can take side trips to the Mississippi River and explore the backwaters along La Crosse area.
That's great. That's awesome. That sounds like a great place to be.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area.
Yeah. Well, John, I appreciate your time. We're going to wind her down. Is there anything we didn't touch on or anything you want to get out there?
I do have a website that has a number of my trips in a kind of a journal fashion, not every day, but maybe every other day or every third day I've got published, and it's irishvoyageur.com. Of course, you got to precede that with the https:// was it / irishvoyageur.com. So if somebody wanted to check into some of my trips, I've got some narrative there and maybe some maps and photographs of what I encountered on some of those trips. There may be some videos on there as well.
Neat. And how about any words of advice? What would you give somebody aspiring to do one of these long distance rivers?
Try to figure out who's done it before, contact them one way or another, and try to get some assistance beforehand, or do your own research by going online and just doing a background check on a particular body of water, and you'll be surprised what you can find. And write your notes down ahead of time so you know what to expect, rather than just showing up on headwaters and not having any idea what to expect. Try to plan for your trip. And then I would encourage people to record some type of a journal, whether it's a photo journal or a narrative, and then share it with others so that you might encounter that have a similar interest.
Yeah, I think that's very sound advice. I know it's been, what's the right word? It's been good for me to be able to write the things, and I have people still comment on the blog every once in a while, and just the people I've been able to meet through the podcast, just talking about things that we're both interested in, the Mississippi River and paddling, and been able to connect with some really cool and interesting people, and you're included in that mix.
Well, if anything, your children and hopefully your grandchildren will appreciate it too if they come across that writing. Yeah,
amen. I haven't thought about it that far ahead yet, but that's another great reason to keep on trucking. Well, John, thanks for the time, and appreciate it, and keep on paddling and enjoying the Mississippi River, man.
All right, well, thank you.
And there you have it. That is episode 90 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with John Sullivan. Appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed the podcast. Share it with an adventure buddy. Let them know there's some episodes they might enjoy. Get out on the water, paddle, canoe, hike, get some fresh air. And if you want to join me on the river, would love to have you. Check it out at buffaloroamer.com. Guided and outfitted canoe trips available there. Thank you to sodapeakoutfitters.com. Thank you to sregear.com and to fichellepaddles.com. All right, take it easy. Get some fresh air. We'll talk to you later.